we see that like these great creatives and I, the people that are listening to this pod, you're part of that group, right? But your first work is not going to be your best work necessarily. So when you think about the first book in your catalog, not only does increasing your catalog help your financial advantage, it helps your craft. Welcome to the Written Word Podcast, the podcast for authors who want to build a successful writing career. I am Ferol Vernon, and I'm here with Ricci Wallman, and this is the Written Word Media Pod. Hello, and welcome to the Written Word Media Podcast. I am Ferol here with Ricci, and Ricci, today we're broadcasting from the tundra, the depths of winter here in North Carolina, where we're recovering from, a catastrophic 2 to 3 inches of snow.
We sure are. It's been a really interesting 10 days for us here. We had an ice storm followed by a snowstorm, and nobody knows what to do about it. So our kids have been home from school for the better part of 2 weeks, and we're just trying to get through here.
Yeah, it's a very, very reminiscent of the COVID era where you have, kids are on remote learning and we've got 4 people all trying to do things in the same house, which has its challenges in terms for like our productivity and for theirs, I think.
Yeah, I had to take a minute yesterday and do a reframe because my to-do list has been long and getting longer, and I just keep falling behind. And so yesterday I realized I was feeling pretty stressed, but I was feeling more stressed about the fact that I wasn't doing things and not necessarily because the things needed to get done. So I sat down and I was like, okay, we got to start over. I took out a piece of paper and I wrote down like what actually needs to get done this week, shortened the list dramatically, and that made me feel a lot better and reminded me that sometimes we can be our own worst enemies in some way. We have these mindsets and we're like, I got to get all of this done. And the universe had other plans or has other plans at the moment. And so just taking a breath and resetting. So I am actually feeling a lot better today.
Well, that makes one of us. My to-do list is still too long and been interrupted by the snow day interruptions. But that's not what we're here to talk today, to talk to everyone today about. Today, we are following up kind of on our reader survey. And if you haven't listened to the last pod where we sort of really dissected the reader trends, give it a listen. There's some cool stuff there. But one of the points that we wanted to go deeper into today is something that we saw in the reader survey this year, but something that we've seen every year that we've done the reader survey. And that is a very specific point that authors who have more books or bigger backlists or more books in series or whatever you want to say tend to earn more money. Right. And so today we really wanted to focus on the power of your catalog, your backlist, and dissect and explain some of the mechanics, how that stuff works, and why we see this pattern on authors sort of year after year after year, where authors that write more and have more books in their catalog earn more money. So we're really talking about the backlist advantage today. And Ricci, I know you and I talked a little bit off camera about how we're going to go through this. And I know you have a very interesting analogy for us to get started with.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this a lot because this is a point that comes up repeatedly, both in the surveys and when authors ask us questions about how do I create a sustainable business writing books. And the analogy that I came up with was just a basic store analogy. So let's imagine that, later on today, you went downtown, wherever you live, whether it's a city or town, and you're walking around and you're on one of the streets that have coffee shops and restaurants, and you see a new store has opened, and you walk into that store and you're like, oh, let's see what they're selling. And it's a t-shirt store. And you walk in and there are t-shirts, hanging all over the store on all the different displays. But every t-shirt has exactly the same design. And you love the design. You're like, whoa, this design is gorgeous. I love it. It's totally my thing. It's going to go great with the clothes in my wardrobe. So you grab a t-shirt, you go up to the register. You meet the owner of the store and you're chatting with him or her saying, hey, I love your design. This is so cool. Congrats on the store. You buy the t-shirt for $10 and you walk out. Over the next couple of weeks, you wear the t-shirt, you get tons of compliments, and then you're downtown again, meeting up a friend for coffee, and you say, all right, I'm going to pop back into the store and see what new t-shirts they have. And so you walk into the store, and once again, t-shirts everywhere. And it's all the same design, and it's the design that you have already purchased. So you're like, okay, I can't buy any more t-shirts unless I want to gift it because I own this already. So you go up to the owner and you're like, hey, how's it going? When are you going to have a new design that's going to come out for the t-shirts? And that's pretty much what happens with readers and books, right? Somebody picks up your book, they absolutely love it, they read it, they devour it, they maybe tell their friends about it, but then they want to read the next thing by you. And so if you only have one book that's out there, that reader, as much as they love you and support you, cannot spend more money with you.
Yeah, I think it's a great analogy because, obviously in this example, the store owner is the author, right? And, a lot of times readers, and we saw this in the survey, that finding an author that they like is one of the primary ways that they discover new reading material, right? And so, in this example, that's very clear, right? Like when somebody finds a store, they want more from it. And if there's nothing more, it's not only that that store owner is failing, they have a thriving store that's selling a great t-shirt, but they simply cannot increase their business without more products, right? And so, I think it's a great analogy because it really illustrates the point, right? And sometimes we get caught in this because books are actually very difficult to write, right? It takes a lot of time to produce, so you can feel like, hey, I'm done. And the truth is, if you want a financially successful author career, and we'll get to if you don't want that later in the show, but if you do want a financially successful career, you do need additional products, right? And
Yeah, so let's talk about the ROI and how that works. So going back to our store owner, business is fine. A couple people are walking off the street. But then she decides, hey, I want to actually do some marketing. So let's say the owner goes and spends $100 to put an ad in the local paper. So creates the ad, and over the next week, she has 10 additional customers come in the door because of the ad that she put in. And of those 10 customers, 8 of them walk in, look around, not for them, they walk out. And then 2 of the customers are like, cool, I love the t-shirts, I think they're great, and they each buy a t-shirt. So you've got 2 customers who each spend $10, so you've made $20 off of your $100 ad. Now, in the future, those customers might come back in a month's time and say, hey, what else do you have? And if you have a new t-shirt, they would buy that. So now maybe they've spent $30 or $40. So you're slowly recouping the amount that you had spent on the ad because you had acquired that customer, and now that customer has bought from you and will continue to buy from you. Now let's just say if when you ran the ad, you had 3 different types of t-shirt in the store, 8 people still probably would have walked out, or maybe 7 people walk out, but one of those people is like, hey, I actually like this design, speaks to me, because now they're 3, not 1. And then of the 2 people who bought the one design, one of those customers is like, oh, I actually like all of these, I'm going to buy all 3, right? So now you've made $50 from that one $100 ad the first time those people walk through the door. And then again, you'll continue to recoup that investment as those customers come back and buy more things from you.
yeah, so I think a really important point that essentially for authors, the more products you have, the more effective your advertising spend will be, right? Because, the way I like to think about it, and this is somewhat simplistic, but, for every author, you got to think about like, what's the number? If somebody found you and bought everything you have, what would that number be? Right. So if you have 10 books at $3 a pop, that's $30. Right. And so that number, that's the total maximum catalog value you can get from one customer. Right. And so I think your advertising spend works much better as that number of your total catalog goes up. Because, just to take extremes, I like to think in extremes, and we do have customers, who have so many books. I don't know how they do it, but if you have a 20 book series, and each book is, $2, that's still $40 of total value, right? That you could get from just one customer. And so it's just an important number for authors to keep in mind as they look at deploying their marketing spend.
Yeah, and in business school, that's called LTV, or the lifetime value of a customer. So if you're reading blog posts or you hear people throw that term around, it's just a fancy way of saying if a customer bought a whole bunch of stuff from you, what would that total come to? And then usually your advertising spend, the cost to acquire a customer needs to be below the lifetime value of that customer, because otherwise you're going to be upside down. If a customer can only spend $40 with you, it doesn't make sense to go out there and spend $100 to get that customer to walk through the door, because you're never going to recoup that delta of $60.
Right. And the other dynamic that we often see when we talk to authors is they're looking for that whole lifetime value after a day or two, right? So they run some
Right.
promotions and they're like, where are my sales? Where are my sales? Where are my sales? And to a certain extent, you should see sales when you run advertising, but you won't see the full value of that advertising on the first day, because it takes people a little while to read a book, right? And so in that example where you have maybe $40 of total goods that somebody can buy, it might take the customer, with 20 books, a few months even to read all of those books and purchase all those books. And so it's just important for authors to keep that in mind. Going back to our t-shirt example, maybe you wear a t-shirt and you don't refresh your wardrobe every day. So you only come back to the t-shirt shop every quarter or so. It does take time in order for you to get the total lifetime value of that reader, and make your advertising spend more powerful.
Yeah, I think the other thing that happens is new authors or authors who have, 1, 2, 3 books compare their budgets to authors who have 20, 30, or 40 books. And so we've just talked about the math. Those are two completely different businesses with two completely different economics of how much you can spend. So if your author friend says, hey, I'm spending $1,000 a month on ads, it doesn't mean that that's the right number for you, because if you have fewer books, you probably are going to be less inclined to spend as much to acquire the customer or the reader that you're targeting.
Right. So, from a high level, increasing your backlist helps you financially because there's more stuff to buy. It also gives you more leverage on each individual dollar spent on advertising. So that's part of the reason why we see this pattern like over and over and over again in the surveys. That economic setup still works, right? Having more books still works.
Yeah, so let's talk about like an example that everybody will appreciate, which is the rise of Colleen Hoover. So I'm sure everybody's heard of Colleen Hoover, a best-selling author. She actually started self-published. I think she started writing back in like 2011, 2012, pretty much around the same time that we started Written Word Media, when self-publishing was just starting to gain traction. She became hybrid. She got picked up. So some of her books were trad, some of her books were not. She kept some of the ebook rights, but she kept writing. And in 2020, when COVID hit, everyone was sitting at home. And Colleen decided that she was going to pick 5 of her ebooks and make them completely free so that people sitting at home had something to do. And so she made those ebooks free. Literally, she's giving away t-shirts at this point. And people read those, grabbed those free ebooks, loved them, and then they went on to purchase her backlist. So at that point, she had over 15 titles. She made 5 of them free, and people would read the free ones and then go on to purchase all the others. I think at some point she had like the top 4 or 5 slots on the bestseller lists, specifically on Amazon for this reason. So her actually her Breakout book, It Ends With Us, was not her first book. I think it was maybe her like 8th, 9th, or 10th book. But the fact that she had this huge catalog meant that when she did hit this tipping point, when she did go viral, fans had so much that they could purchase from her that she was able to really take advantage of that groundswell of support and that groundswell of fandom that she had.
Yeah, it's really important, right? So it's like writing your backlist might help you today. It might help you tomorrow. It might help you a lot when you have sort of that breakout hit. But it helps you in any scenario, and that's why it's such a positive thing. And I think, the Colleen Hoover example is really nice, and it's a good segue into the other benefits of your backlist. We've talked a lot about sort of the mechanics of why it's financially beneficial for you as an author to have a bigger backlist. But there's some other reasons to do this, and there's some other reasons to continue writing that are good for your career. And I think, like you said, Colleen Hoover's first books, that wasn't her biggest hit, right? And we see that that dynamic on a lot of different producers, creatives, both in our industry and outside. And I think, Ricky, we were talking earlier about one that was really interesting, and that's Hamilton.
Yeah. So, Hamilton is like the probably biggest Broadway show in the last 10 years. And it was written, directed, and acted in by Lin-Manuel Miranda. And I thought that was his first show, his first Broadway show, right? Because it was so buzzy, and I watched it on Disney Plus, and eventually when you could actually afford to get tickets, we went and saw it. And I thought, oh, what a genius! He did this on his first go. And then a few months ago, I was on Disney Plus, and they had In the Heights by Lin-Manuel Miranda, and I was like, oh, cool, he has something new. Turns out In the Heights was his first Broadway, it might have been off-Broadway show. And so I watched it, and it was so interesting because there were so many elements that he utilized in the Heights, his first show, that were pretty good, but they didn't have the same power that they did in Hamilton. And so you can kind of see some of those elements, the way that he had like the narrator, the way that he had like the rapping and the, very fast talking, and some of the musical elements, they were all there. I was like, oh, that reminds me of Hamilton. But they didn't have that power. Come to look at Hamilton, you can see how he took some of those elements and he just made them better. He was able to workshop them to bring them to fruition in this absolute masterpiece. And so I think that's a cool example, in the theater world, of somebody who honed their craft with different reps. And I don't have all the information on him. It's possible he had, I think he did go to get his MFA, or he went to school for this, so he probably did some little plays, smaller stuff
Sure.
while he was actually learning. But it all culminated in this masterpiece work. And it wasn't like that just happened the very first time that he did something.
Yeah, it's an important dynamic in sort of like, pop culture, where we sort of, oh, this is their breakout hit. And we think about that as first, because it's the first time
Right.
you heard of them, right? Like, I'd never heard of him before Hamilton. And you look at like, one of my favorite sort of movies franchise of all time, which is Star Wars. And, that's the first time most people heard of George Lucas, but it wasn't his first movie. His first movie was THX 1138, right? Which is like not a masterpiece.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, right. Nobody else has. But then he went on to create, one of the most successful franchises in media, like of all time. And so I think, there's this concept of, and we see it again and again and again, right? So Michael Crichton, right? His first book was not Jurassic Park, but that's probably the first one that you read, right? And maybe the first movie adaptation that you saw. And so we see that like these great creatives, and I, the people that are listening to this pod, you're part of that group, right? But your first work is not going to be your best work necessarily. And so when you think about the first book in your catalog, not only does increasing your catalog help your financial advantage, it helps your craft, right? It helps you become a better producer. So in the t-shirt example, it helps you create more innovative designs, more interesting types of apparel for your store. And I think that's a really important thing, because it can be very motivating when you think about, instead of like, oh my gosh, book one's not hitting, you're like, wow, how much did I learn writing that first book, right? I can't wait to start book two because I've learned so much, now I can get better. The last point I'll make on this, that I did a little research before the show, and I started looking at some of our customers who've written in series. Now, today we're talking about backlog, not specifically series, but typically authors write their series in chronological order. They write book one before they write book seven. And when you look at the reviews, and take the reviews with a grain of salt, but it is one measure, reviews tend to go up as a series goes longer, right? And that could be because the fandom stays with it, but it also could be authors get better at writing, right? And I think that we see this over and over again, where, often while you're really interested and excited in book one, the other books become better as you hone your craft.
Yeah, I think this is just a fact of life. Practice does make perfect. We say that to our kids all the time. And when you do something over and over again, you just get better at it. Both because you're honing your craft, and also because you're learning like what resonates. I mean, even this pod, we've been doing it for about 6 months, and I went back and listened to the first episode. I don't know why I was doing that, but It was, it was cringy the first time, and it was even more cringy this time. I was like,
Watching
whoa,
it.
we were really, we were not that good. And I'm sure in a year's time, we're going to look back at this episode and think, oh my gosh, still not great. And that's good because it means that you're continuously improving. We're also learning based on the feedback that we're getting from everyone listening, like which topics resonate, which topics don't. We're also learning basic things like, I didn't wear AirPods for the first 10 episodes. So there was feedback, and it's like, oh, you got to put your AirPods in. So just by doing, you learn and you do get better and better. And that is definitely another benefit of growing your catalog, whether that's writing into series or just writing standalones that you can include, within your catalog and your backlist.
Yeah, I have a friend, and we always talk about we get together we used to work together, we get together every now and again, and we say, man, like 5 years ago, I was such an idiot. Like if I'd only known now what I knew 5 years ago. And then, we had a beer, we were looking at each other, and you're like, if we ever come here and be like, wow, I'm great. Like 5 years ago, I knew everything. It's like, that's a really good sign you're not learning and not growing, right? And so as authors, if you keep writing for those 5 years, you'll be better, and you'll look back 5 years and be like, oh man, I wish I knew now what I knew then what I know now. But I think that's the dynamic that we always see, right? Like if your first work is not as good as your subsequent work, that means you're learning, right? It's not a bad sign. So anybody who's discouraged by like, oh, my book one's not taking off, that's okay. You're just at the start.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about if somebody's listening to this and they're like, yeah, I wrote my first book, and like I just don't have it in me to write any more books, right? Like I just don't want to do it.
Yep.
What do we do then?
Yeah, I think this is, it's also a fair point, right? So we're trying to, surface this opinion that we may be hearing without hearing it, but like writing a book is hard, right? And I think that will resonate with everybody. It's not an easy thing to do. And so if you are kind of done after one, or if you're done after a few, whatever that is, and you're like, great, I get it. Big backlog is better. I'm not going to do it, right? Then what do you do next? And I think, there are some options, and we do have a few examples of how people have managed to make their career successful on a very limited catalog. And I think one of those examples from the nonfiction world is James Clear. And Ricci, I know that is one of your favorite books, so I'll let you sort of unpack that a little bit for us.
Yeah, so James Clear wrote Atomic Habits. It's really just like an incredible book. I think I bought it 5 or 6 years ago. I have the hard copy, and every January I go back to it because I have a bunch of stuff bookmarked. And as I'm doing my intentions for the year and thinking about, building habits, I reference that book. Now, James, it's the only book that he has written, and James had built a huge fan base before he published it. So that's for another episode. But he published it, had a fan base, and it's consistently one of the top books on the nonfiction bestseller list and has been for years now. So he's got one book and he's selling that one book. And he's made it really successful, right? And he has a trad publisher. They put a lot of marketing behind it, all the good things. He also has translated the book into multiple languages. He's gone into, he has an audiobook, multiple formats. And so that's one thing that he's doing. He's diversifying his product offering by taking the English hardcover book, putting in his different formats, different languages. Interestingly, this January, I was listening to a pod that he was on, and he said he's also launching a workbook this year, and he's also launching like a desktop calendar, which I haven't seen, so I'm not exactly sure how that's going to work. But even James, who's been highly successful and only had the one book for a really long time, is starting to see that he has a fan base who want more from him, and I'll buy more stuff from him. But he's also said, like, right now I don't have another book in me. I don't have another topic that I want to write about. I don't have anything more to write about habits that isn't in the current book. So he doesn't want to put out another book. So what he's doing instead is he's building accompanying products and merch around the core asset that he has, which is that particular book. And I thought it was interesting that even somebody like James Clear, who has sold, I think, millions of copies of that book.
Oh, definitely millions, yeah.
Is still, you could be like, he probably has enough money, right? But even he sees that, he's leaving money on the table, that there's potential here, that people love his book and they want more from him. And so he's trying to figure out how to do that on his own terms, but in a way that will both serve the core message of his current book, but also serve the people who are such big fans of his.
Yeah, and I think, that's a really great example from nonfiction. I think, he deserves a lot of credit for saying I don't have another book in him instead of just writing something kind of garbagey that we would all buy anyway, right?
Right.
He could have done that, but he's not, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. But on the sort of fiction side, there's also a lot of options, and it's actually in some ways, because it's based on imagination, easier to extend, right? James has said, "Hey, I don't have another book in me," because he doesn't have another topic that he's researched for thousands of hours that he wants to share with the world. Writing the fiction book, you can come up with all kinds of interesting ways if you don't have another novel in you. And some of these, we've talked about before, but I think they're really interesting. And you sort of mentioned it a little bit when you're talking about Atomic Habits, is like format. So that is like, hey, I have an ebook, now I have an audiobook. Hey, it's in English, now it's in German, right? Now it's in Spanish. So you can take the same piece of content and then find new markets for it. You can find new formats for it. One of the things that we're really seeing now that I love are these special editions with the
Yeah.
sprayed edges and the vinyl inserts. These are the same book as the ebook, but they're beautiful collectible pieces, right? And so it's not you have to write another book; you just have to work on creating a different format for the book that you already have. I read a lot of fantasy and science fiction, and one of the things that's really cool in a lot of those books is maps. And so maybe you're not rewriting a book, maybe you're releasing a special edition map, right? Or a special edition, even short story, things like that. So I think if you don't have another full length book in you, that's okay. There are a lot of ways you can sort of grow your business as an author without writing more books.
Yeah, and I think in the fiction world, there's a lot of possibility for merch, right? So you could you could literally create T-shirts, right, with
There
your
you go.
characters on them. You could have, especially with you find a great illustrator with AI illustrations. You could create something that is your world. You can take a quote that you have in the book that everybody mentions in the reviews and put that on a mug. You could have stickers. So back to our analogy of the T-shirt shop, if that owner is like, look, I have the one T-shirt design, I now have a collector's edition of that T-shirt design. But then when you go up to the register, you can also buy stickers and you can buy a mug with that design. So basically taking that core asset and proliferating it onto other types of products, and not necessarily on the T-shirt every time, or in this, for authors, it doesn't have to be that you're now creating additional books within your catalog and your backlist.
Yeah, and just to tie it back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the episode, it's really just trying to drive up the total value of your catalog when you get a fan. So what can
Right.
they buy? And so if they can buy only one book, but they can buy the ebook, they can buy the special edition, they can buy the audiobook, all of those things, they can buy a one-off map, they can buy a t-shirt, all of those things increase the total value of a fan as you're sort of spending money to acquire them through advertising. And the last thing I wanted to say on this, the people that sort of say, "Hey, I'm one and done." Um, you can also change your mindset, right? Like there are some folks who are not pursuing financial success, right? That writing that book is around legacy, storytelling, personal challenge, whatever it might be, and that's okay as well. You shouldn't feel like, "Hey, I'm not an author if I don't want to write more." If you wrote, you're an author. And I think people need to understand that. But there's ways to change your career to be more financially successful, and you can also change your mindset to say, sometimes for some folks, enough is enough, and that's a perfectly acceptable way to move forward.
Yeah, I think it's the difference between are books your hobby or are they your business, right? And if something is a hobby, you spend money on it. So people who play golf, they're spending money on golf. If you go to yoga, you're spending money on a yoga studio. Those are your hobbies. If you're building a business, that's different. You're expecting the business to actually generate money for you. So figuring out
Yeah.
which one is right for you is really important.
Yeah. And I think, sometimes people hear this word hobbyist and they get a little sensitive, and that's not really what we're talking about. What we're talking about is people who are writing for the passion, potentially, and not the finances, right? And I think the most successful authors are doing both. They love it and they're making money doing it, right? But that's not for everybody. Some people are like, I love doing this. I love producing this. I love that it exists in the world, but I, do something else to pay my rent. Right. And that's okay. But I think like figuring out what camp you are, like, what does this book do for you? Is it like you said, is this supposed to give me money? Right? Does this supposed to be like, maybe painting or something where it's like something that fulfills me deeply inside, but maybe isn't designed to give me money, and kind of somewhere in between. And I think everybody's just got to figure out where they are on that spectrum, and that can help you figure out, which of the things that we've talked about is kind of the right next step.
And then I'll be like, yeah, so let's bring it back to where we started in the beginning. For the authors that are trying to make money off of their books or more formats or more merch, having products that readers can buy from you is going to mean more income. And maybe, Ferol, you want to recap,
Yeah.
just some of the things that we talked about in the show today.
Yeah, and that dynamic that we see it every year, right? So this is not a new finding. It's like more books, more financial success for authors. And we talked about how, your first book's not necessarily going to be your breakout success. Don't worry about that. Don't beat yourself up if that's where you are. Having more books almost always allows you to have a more successful career. And that's both because there's more things for you to buy or for a reader to buy when they discover you, and because your advertising spend goes farther when you have more things, right? And then the final thing is having that first book under your belt and moving forward and continuing to write helps hone your craft, so your products are better the more you work on them. And sort of, you mentioned, Ricky, practice makes perfect, which is not always easy to hear, but it's very, very true. So we really hope this was helpful, explaining the power of your backlist, the power of having additional products. And, we're really looking forward to seeing everybody's feedback in the comments about what they think and how their backlist is working for them.
Yeah. Well, this has been really fun. Great episode. Thanks, Ferol, for leading it as usual.
Absolutely. All right, authors, that's the show for today. I hope that was helpful, explaining the mechanics of your backlist and of your catalog. Keep writing. We're here to support you, and we'll see you on the next show.